Welcome to the Strong Towns webcast, Creating Community Through Local Food. I'm Kia, Director of Community Engagement for Strong Towns and sender of all of the emails that you get. And I'm here with my guest today, Molly Rockamann of EarthDance Farms. Thank you so much for being here with us, Molly. It's really been a pleasure getting to know you locally. As some of you might know, I live in St. Louis, and EarthDance is up in Ferguson, and I actually have a bit of a personal connection to EarthDance because my partner, Chris Bowman, also a Strong Towns member, was an apprentice there right when we moved to St. Louis. And I always think of EarthDance as this amazing place that welcomed us to town and made us feel really at home and has really shaped our values for a while. So I'm really happy to have this opportunity to talk to Molly and to talk about how local food and farming intersects with the Strong Towns mission and what all of us can do to strengthen our local food systems if we think that that's the thing we need to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and dive right in. For everyone watching, if at any point you have a question, just pop it in that Q&A box right at the bottom. And at the end, we're going to have some time for us to answer those questions. And do not be shy. No question is stupid. Go ahead and ask anything that's on your mind. So just to get to know Molly a little bit, Molly, if you could just tell us a little bit about you, how you personally became a farmer, and how you came to found EarthDance Farm and later the Farm School at EarthDance Farm.
Yeah. So thanks, Kia, first for inviting me to be on this. This is pretty cool. Definitely the most tech-savvy interview I've done. So EarthDance, let's see. I first was introduced to this farm where we are located as a 15-year-old. So often I think about how the impact of just a single visit to the farm could affect any one of our young people who come and visit our farm now. Because it's shocking to think that I literally didn't even work on the farm. I just, barely came up the driveway and met these old farmers, Al and Caroline Miller, and that left such a strong impression that I was wondering into my college years what was going to happen to this farm when they passed away. They were in their 80s when I met them. And fast forward several years, I actually majored in environmental studies and knew I wanted to do outdoor education, but didn't find as much delight in counting populations of tree frogs as some of my peers. I kind of wondered, is this really what I want to do? I know that there's a need for this, but I kind of felt like my heart was more on the human behavior side of things, and really, I've always been passionate about health and nutrition from a human perspective. So it wasn't until I actually went abroad and studied in Ghana that I realized that all of these huge, big picture, problems and challenges I was seeing in the world of international trade, of women's oppression, of farm worker justice, of environmental crises, were really all very tied to agriculture. So I think I initially did come at it from more of an academic perspective and personal passion, but then as opposed to my family farming, I think that fewer and fewer of our generation actually grew up on farms. So I see that as something that I would like to be a part of the generation that changes. I would like for more of us to actually be raising our children on the land, because I think that's one of the reasons why we're at this moment in history of our children having a shorter life expectancy than their parents because of the food that we're eating.
Wow.
That was a roundabout way of talking about how I got to here. So I don't know if that answered enough of your question. I'm happy to.
Yeah. Well, we'll double back around on it. I kind of just want to build on what you just said. But for a little bit, one more layer of background, your farm is in Ferguson, Missouri, which some of our viewers might have heard about from the national news, but that's certainly not all there is into Ferguson's story. Could you tell us a little bit from your perspective about what Ferguson's really like, and what are the unique challenges and assets of having a farm there specifically?
Yeah. So EarthDance, people can never believe that we're in Ferguson, but this farm actually predates when the city of Ferguson was even established. This farm's been here since 1883. The city of Ferguson was established in, I believe, 1896, and the farm used to span over 200 acres. And just like many farms, you know, they have shrunk in size. The first and second generations of millers sold off land to development, and we're now in the middle of a neighborhood. We actually have, kind of grown into this position of being considered urban agriculture, which I find a bit funny because it's not urban from the perspective of we're taking up an old abandoned city lot. It actually was agriculture before there was any urbanization around it.
Right.
It's really more suburban or, you know, peri-urban as far as like urban planning goes. It's inner ring suburb. But yeah, one of the challenges is that, for example, we're beholden to all of the municipal code regulations that a lot of farms don't have to worry about the specific count of their chickens, you know, being over the amount that are allowable in the local city code. That's just one tiny example. They also want to know the size of our signage for the farm, you know, things that like you're worried about for the sake of your neighborhood kind of development.
Yeah, well, that's certainly stuff we talk about at Strong Towns all the time, as a site that's focused in large part on urban planning and development, and farms' role in that is really unique. Are there specific other development challenges to growing food in a residential primarily area?
Yeah, a lot of places, because if they're zoned for residential, they're not allowed to actually have commercial activities happening on site. So we're lucky in that the farm was a bit grandfathered in or grandmothered in to, you know, the farm predated, but because some of those activities haven't been carried out consistently every single year, if we're reintroducing them, all of a sudden we have to get special use permits because we want to have a farm stand, even though the millers had a farm stand decades ago. So I think that more and more cities are getting a hold of this idea that actually it's not a terrible idea to allow farmers, urban farmers, to sell what they're growing right on site, that there's nothing inherently wrong with that.
Right.
Even though it technically could put you in what people would consider a different zoning class, you know, that having these mixed zoning codes is actually beneficial for the community.
Yeah. You know, I ran across this stat the other day that 50 years ago, we were producing 70% of our own food in our own communities on average in America, and now it's 10%. And obviously, zoning is part of what has to do with that, but then also big changes in industrial agriculture and just in culture generally. What do you think the impact of local food becoming less of a presence in our lives has in our towns, from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think people have, one of the words that I really hate when people use it to describe what we do is the word cute, because I am not interested in being cute. Our farm is addressing serious problems and has serious solutions. So I think that that's one kind of cultural, I guess I would say, outcome of having this become more the abnormality than the norm, is people cutesifying the local food movement. And, you know, while I think there's nothing wrong with having a wedding on a farm and having, you know, barnwood decor in your home and all these things, it's like, we need to not just romanticize this and want it for its aesthetics. We want it for its values. You know, this is really kind of gets at our very need to survive in modern day times. I was just giving a tour, actually. I'm looking out here. I wish, you know what, maybe I'll let you see, my view from my window here. We've got some of our apprentices having lunch out there at the picnic tables. We've got two of our staff taking their computers to work outside. It's so nice out. We just had a group of about 10 people from a local food service company take a tour, and one of the gentlemen asked the question, you know, they source, of course, from all over the country for their customers' needs, and their largest supply of produce comes from California. And he's saying, you know, with all of these water crises and with the cost of fuel rising and all of these issues, they're seeing, you know, just to truck in truckloads, literally 500 pounds of basil that they're selling each week from California, you can imagine not only the freight costs, and it's so ridiculous to think of basil being shipped in from California,
Right.
but also so not only the carbon footprint on the transportation, but the production of these items. That is often totally neglected from the climate change conversation, is what role agriculture can actually have in either making climate change worse or mitigating it. And organic farming is a solution for actually mitigating climate change, because we are actually letting carbon be sequestered in the soil where it's meant to be, instead of releasing to the atmosphere. So these are just a small sliver of the huge problems and challenges that we are addressing with even small scale urban farms that we can be a model for. So it's not just some token, oh, isn't that nice? Some kids can go and pick tomatoes and, and see how a vegetable is grown. This is like addressing some of our biggest environmental issues today.
Yeah. And beyond environmental issues, economic issues. So Strong Towns, as you might know, is a bit different among organizations that discuss the importance of local food, because we do so mostly through the lens of like urban resilience, how we make our towns financially strong. And we believe that a robust local food system is an excellent indicator, among other things. And like the climate change conversation is really important to me personally, but it's an indicator that your town is prepared to become financially strong and resilient in all kinds of ways. So if you agree, I'm wondering if you could give an example or two of the ways in which you've seen your local community in Ferguson and around St. Louis grow financially stronger because of your farm or the local food system. How does it impact the region economically?
So that is one of the goals of our farm and garden apprenticeship program, which your partner Chris participated in, is actually training this next generation of farmers to actually have them see that this can be a viable career option. Because I think but the numbers show that the large majority of farmers actually rely on off-farm income to make their living. So fewer and fewer people are actually making a living farming, and we're seeing, some people are getting a lot wealthier with the farm, the people that own the means of production, and then are subcontracting out the labor, often to workers who are not born in this country, but dare we say that, we don't want them to have jobs here because it's their jobs we want for American-born people, and yet, often there's not enough people that actually want these jobs because they're in such terrible working conditions. So, I know I'm sounding like I'm getting off on a tangent talking about farm worker justice, but that is one of the big economic questions that we're asking that our politicians are raising up, is like, is the resilience of the small town dependent on such an influx of imported labor, and people who aren't being treated fairly? That is an indicator to me of a very weak economic system. Not because we, don't benefit from those people's good work, but because the equation doesn't actually help those communities. It just helps the few companies that are based in those communities, or not even based, that are operating in those communities. So in terms of bringing that down to Ferguson, by educating people in how they could actually be profitable as small scale farmers, we've seen a number of apprentices already go on to start their own farm businesses. So for example, Paige Pardo, who did our program 2 years ago, has a company not only raising a lot of poultry for eggs, but she's also getting into consulting already, because she's learned so much in her first year of raising a wide variety of farm animals, how to do it and how to care for them. We're seeing there's a gentleman, JP, who started a business called Straw Hat Aquaponics. So he's talk about urban growing, he's growing indoors even. There is gosh, so many people that have actually added on enterprises to existing family farms, so to make that more profitable. And even beyond the apprentices at EarthDance, at the Ferguson Farmers Market, we've seen vendors who have had a booth for several years who have then been able to open a brick and mortar shop in our community because they've started to build a customer base at the farmers market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good transition into, I had a couple of questions about farmers markets because I think they're a really interesting, economically, they're a really interesting idea. Yes. I was reading this one study out of England actually, but it does apply over here, that putting up a farmer's market actually increases the foot traffic to the neighboring brick and mortar businesses from by like between 15 and 27%. And that like farmers markets are both sort of an accelerant to existing businesses and also an incubator for new businesses, that sometimes a farmer's market stall will make the leap into, you know, helping create a really vibrant downtown. I'm wondering if you have any stories about something like that happening in your community.
Yeah, I mean, this one vendor that comes to mind in particular goes by the name of Banana Yummies, and they sell like chocolate covered frozen bananas, you know, which aren't necessarily a local product in their ingredients, but they are locally produced. And, you know, this is a mom in our community who wanted to have a kind of an additional source of income, and it's turned into a full-time job. And she's even just recently expanded her operations and moved locations because she was outgrowing her space where she started the brick and mortar in Ferguson. So so that's one example, but I know of many others that the farmers market is a real boost to how they can really capitalize their businesses, because, you know, the barriers to starting a small business of just not only having the capital to put into your actual product development, but then the piece that often people forget about is that marketing takes money too. But if you're lowering your marketing expenses by having that direct sale relationship and building your market base and your clientele slowly through weekly traffic at the farmers market, I've heard that statistic too, that beyond incubating those new businesses, it also has an upward effect, which is why grocery stores are having farmers markets in their parking lots, because they're seeing, even though it's a little counterintuitive, you think, oh, well, how, you know, we're directing sales away from our produce. It's like, no, people go to the farmers market and then they go to the store and buy everything else that they couldn't get at the market. So they actually see an increase in sales during the farmers market hours.
Yeah, that reminds me of something we talk about a lot at Strong Towns, which is just the importance of incremental development. Like, what's the small, low-lift thing that anybody can do tomorrow to make your town just one notch stronger? Because so often when we have conversations about things like farming, someone who isn't as necessarily into farming will hear that and say, like, you want me to tear my house off the foundation and like completely revolutionize the way I live? And that's not necessarily what we mean. There's so much that we can do kind of one step at a time, and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It's a small bet, and it can have a really big return. Go ahead, please.
Well, one thing I really feel strongly about that I'd like to mention, as far as that's such a great point about incremental change, and that I think often wonderful good food advocates think we all should have a farmer's market in our town. No, that is not what I personally as a farmer would ever advocate for, because what the incremental change that is needed is to first support the existing farmers markets in your region, because until there is such a saturation of you know, sales really at those farmers markets, where those farmers are consistently selling out of the product they have week after week, and they need to, you know, expand the volume of their production, until they can show that through farmers market foot traffic, you're otherwise just going to be, you know, taking some from this one and moving it into another, and you're going to be requiring the farmer to do twice as much work to make the same amount of sales. So I cringe every time I get an email or a phone call and have to tactfully say, you know, to somebody who's really excited to open a farmer's market in their community, to say, please don't. That's not what is really going to serve the wider local food system, because first we need farmers to actually be able to make enough income for one market without having to do twice the amount of work for the same amount of sales. And if you can support the existing market, then they can capitalize their operations to be able to expand and service more markets. So that's exactly your point of incremental change. I want to make that point with farmers markets.
Right. Well, and I know another way you've sort of underscored that point is you developed a shuttle system to bring people to the farmers market in Ferguson. And that raises a question, which is, how do your region's transportation challenges intersect with your local food challenges? Could you say a little bit about that?
I could say a lot about that.
Great.
Yeah. St. Louis is not known for having the easiest to navigate nor the most robust public transportation system, as you well know. It's a sad state that we don't put a lot of our transportation dollars into public transit. We put more of it into widening our highways and making it easier for car travelers, which I'm totally a beneficiary of. I will admit I travel mostly by car. But I do think it's really important that we invest in this because, for example, it would take somebody who lives on one side of Ferguson at least 45 minutes to literally travel a mile to a mile and a half to get to where the location of the Ferguson Farmers Market is because of the number of stops and transfers they'd have to make. So we saw the low-hanging fruit that we could work towards increasing people's access to food as well as increasing traffic at the farmers market is to simply, like you said, offer a shuttle service. While it would be great to have a whole new, healthy food store, local foods grocery store on that area where there's not as much access to or ownership of cars. But in the meantime, it's like we could invest the money into that, or we could first try to drum up more interest in the existing farmers market. So it's certainly not without its challenges. Even just letting enough people know about it really takes at least a full year of operation before we're really going to see a lot of usage of it. So again, incremental change. We have to be happy when we have a dozen people riding this shuttle in the first year because there's that many people that may be changing their shopping patterns. It's not just they're just, it's a matter of getting on a bus when they would otherwise get on another bus. This is actually changing people's where they get their groceries too. Right.
It changes a lot about your life. I mean, I will say that you are personally responsible for me not buying kale for the last year because I grow it all.
Oh, that's so funny.
Things like that.
I'm like, why we're not buying it? Oh, because you're growing it. That's great.
Growing it, yeah.
That's awesome.
And I grow way too much of it and I give it away, and it's really impacted my social relationships for the better, for sure.
You're a green scout.
Yeah, it's been fun. So I wanted to step back for a moment and ask a little bit more of a general question that I know that some of our viewers, I see Rolly's on the webcast right now, and he asked me about this before the webcast, which is, what is it about local food in particular that can uniquely make a community strong, as opposed to producing clothes locally or, whatever other product? Why does food need to be grown close to the source as possible? What does that do for us?
That's a really, really poignant question. And it makes me think of a phrase that I heard or read years ago in a book that I'll never forget because it's the kind of revolution I want to be a part of, and that is a delicious revolution. So as a college student, as a young person, I was a common protester. I would go to a lot of events to rally against, what was happening with the World Bank and IMF and the war in Iraq, and just things that I really was becoming more and more aware of as a young person. But I kept coming back to this feeling of that I didn't want to be, I think that work is really important, and I think it takes a special person to be able to have the resilience to do that over and over. I quickly realized that for my demeanor, I needed to do something that felt like proposing an alternative solution to what felt like this big, scary problem of, globalization and the degradation of farm workers and just things that I saw as real crises in our humanity. And I felt like doing something small, which, you know, still has a huge ripple effect in our community, but doing something that's very centered and something that's so basic to being human, which is growing sustenance. You know, we can't go very long without eating. You know, most of us, it's our most direct connection with nature every day, whether you work in an office building and you're maybe outside walking across the parking lot to your car, you still engage with food, hopefully multiple times a day. And so if we can use those little bits of people's days to actually connect people to a different way of growing that food, if they just start to educate themselves, you know, it's important to first educate the taste buds before you can educate the brain. So if you can retrain your taste buds, I mean, people who eat mostly conventionally or chemically grown foods will still say, but gosh, you know, there's nothing like a homegrown tomato. I still miss tomatoes grown in that good Missouri soil. You know, there's like a terroir, I guess they say in the wine world, there's a terroir associated with local food that you don't really get that feeling with locally sewn clothing.
Interesting. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the aesthetics of the things that I like and how much my politics are influenced by my taste buds, by my sort of like natural inclinations. But, you know, since we started talking about it at Strong Towns, it seems like local food is something that you don't even necessarily have to be like a big crunchy granola hippie to like see an impact in your community immediately, because it's something that we buy almost daily sometimes, or weekly at least. It's such a constant part of our transactions.
Right. I mean, food is very politicized, and at the same time, I feel like it is, and has the potential to be, I should say, the most nonpartisan issue that we can come together on, because there's not too many people that can argue with wanting to have a healthy food supply for our country, and there's not too many people that could argue with the benefits of doing that on as local level as possible. Really, the biggest things in our way are, unfortunately, the agribusiness conglomerates that see it as a threat to their profitability. But I think this is where being grassroots and being small and having agility is really beneficial to the local food movement, because we're not waiting for, you know, we're building those relationships directly with customers. We're seeing our bank account go up directly because of how many people are seeing on Facebook a video of the food that they can find tomorrow at the farmer's market. I mean, this is the exciting and daunting world we live in. We're so connected to screens like we are right now. But let's leverage this and say, oh, because of this, I'm going to go and spend $10 more at the farmer's market this weekend.
Yeah. So that's a good segue into sort of, I have like a little rapid fire 3 questions for you. I'm starting from the standpoint that everyone who's watching this like loves this, is completely convinced that local food is something they need to be a part of. So I want to start with, if someone who's watching this says like, wow, this is really exciting, but I'm probably not going to get down in the dirt and grow anything today. What are some ways that a total neophyte could support their local food system besides the obvious, go to your farmer's market, maybe get a community supported agriculture share, a CSA, or something like that? I'm so curious what you think.
Okay, so I have a tack from many different approaches. So for any people who get fired up about policy, Google Farm Bill 2018. This is crucial. So this is something that people don't think about. You hear Farm Bill, you think, oh, that's, you know, has to do with large scale commodity production. Yes, it does to a great degree, but that's also where a lot of our SNAP dollars, that's where the SNAP benefits come in for people who care about food access. That's where the Beginning Farmer Rancher Development Program is funded. That's where that's where farmers who are growing organically, who ridiculously have to get certified to show that they're not using prohibited substances, you know, but that's where you get cost share of organic certification. There's so many different great programs that the Farm Bill covers that we need to maintain in order to actually shift our food supply. So I'm a little bit more of a, personally, like wanting to have less government interference in some economic realm. But in the meantime, I kind of see us in this transitional state of our farm is going to utilize all of the government resources we can, because goodness knows that the larger scale farms are utilizing those. And so in order to even have a chance of competing, we need to actually use the boost while they're available to us, until we can get over this kind of hump of doing it all on our own. So anyways, that's all to say that look at how farm bills can support more organic production and more food access is my personal belief, but just even become informed about it. Another way people could get involved, you already mentioned it, is simply to not just go to their local farmers market, but find some way to directly connect with a farmer. You know, every farmer wears a million hats. You know, not only are they growing the food, but they're often doing the marketing piece too. Even doing something just like a random act of social media kindness and giving a review to a farm that you know of means a lot to a farmer. It can help, those incremental changes can help boost that farm's reputation and help them market on a budget. Another thing that you could do is, I mean, there's always, you know, different nonprofits that are supporting this. So of course, donating to a local nonprofit in your community that you know is working on food issues that you feel like you can get behind, go to their events, go to, you know, donate an auction item, whatever it may be. That's on my mind right now, of course. But I don't know, are there any other areas that you think you're curious about?
Personally, all of them. But I think that's a good one to get us started on. And if people have more questions in the Q&A, we can dig deeper. And keep them coming. We've got some good ones coming in. So the second group of people I want to give advice to is someone who says, yeah, I do want to grow a little bit, or maybe I want to process food or something like that. What advice would you have for them, especially if they live maybe even in an apartment or in an urban area where land is at a premium and it's not going to be their vocation? But I know that that's like what my partner who did your apprenticeship program, he falls into that gap, and we've learned a lot from you. So I thought I would give you the opportunity to tell everyone else.
Great. Well, I think, you know, definitely starting small with something manageable that you're not going to say, okay, I'm going to do 50 trays on my balcony, you know, of all of these different varieties, literally like letting yourself just dabble in 2 or 3 crops at a time to build up your confidence. Because we always, it's kind of like, you know, going to a buffet line super hungry, and then you just fill your plate with too much, and then and you're like, oh, but I wasted all this. It's like, it can be the same thing in the dead of winter when you order all these seeds, or you go to a plant sale and you buy all these seedlings, you get super excited, but then the reality sets in. You go on vacation this summer and you don't, you know, you don't keep things watered and everything dies, and you're like, oh, so much for that. So just start small with container gardens in the case of an apartment dweller, or join a local community garden. I'm not sure if there's, I would assume that there's a website where you could literally put in your zip code and find a local community garden to you, but I don't know of the actual URL of one. I think Kia's going to search that for you. Right
you can see my Google face happening.
Yeah.
communitygarden.org/find-a-garden.
Okay. Well, simple as that. Thanks to Google. But yeah, find a community garden where you can just rent a plot if you want to have more bed space than you could actually grow. Another thing I'm doing, because I don't actually grow that many vegetables at my own house because I get so many vegetables from the farm, is I'm putting more of my time and energy into herbs and fruit trees. If you do have a small yard, you can kind of figure out what is the best use of the whatever full sun that you have. Because by putting more of my time into perennials, I'm going to have to maintain them less and less as the years go on, and ideally get more and more yields off of them. And I'm also starting to just start sprouts, like literally, you know, whether it be buckwheat sprouts or onion sprouts or radish sprouts, you know, all those little microgreens and sprouts that are really expensive when you buy them from the store and they go bad really quickly. You just grow your own. It's a super cheap way to increase your nutrition and in your own kitchen. You don't even have to have a windowsill.
Yeah, you do have to have a cat who won't jump on top of them.
Well, if you grow them in the jar, if you're doing sprouts, not microgreens.
That's a good idea. I'll revisit mung beans after this call. So, and then the last question is, what if there's somebody watching who wants to just go whole hog, move and start a farm? What are I know that could be an entire webcast unto itself, but what are 3 things you wish you'd known when you started EarthDance?
Oh gosh. Well, I don't know if this is as much of like what I wish I'd known, but maybe
Uh-huh.
what I wish I'd done is work
Mm.
on a few more farms before starting
Uh-huh.
this one. More so just like selfishly for having more experiences. I've learned a ton since starting EarthDance, and I'm grateful for the timing of when I did start it, because I feel like it's when our region really needed it. But I do wish that, especially livestock, that I'd realized that I had an interest in raising animals.
Mm.
And that's a really hard thing to, like, of course, with my job now, to like go, and it's really more of an immersive farming apprenticeship is what I would need to really learn livestock management.
Yeah.
Um, but so I would first say, like, go and apprentice, find out about, if you want to just dabble, you can be a woofer, which is willing workers on organic farms, and kind of do it almost as a vacation for a few weeks. And there's different farms all over the world, so you could use it as a way to travel too, that are happy to host woofers. But then if you're more serious about it and want to spend a whole season learning from a farm, you can do a part-time program like what EarthDance offers, which allows you to have a full-time job or other work while doing the apprenticeship. Or you could go and spend full-time, a full-time season on a farm. And there's a multitude of farms that are looking for interns. You can search ATTRA, ATTRA.org, and they have a huge listing of different farms looking for interns. But I think getting the hands-on experience is pretty critical. There's more and more university programs that will offer organic farming programs. So great, if you're in college, take advantage of those. But I don't think you have to go back to college to learn how to farm.
Yeah, agreed. Well, we've got time for 3 or 4 questions, and we've got some good ones coming in. So I'm going to start with one from Rolly. Zoning arose in part because certain uses of land were seen as incompatible with other uses of nearby land. As fights over bug spraying show, even farms next to other farms can cause problems if the farms are slightly different in terms of crops, or if one is organic and one is non, etc. What can farms do to exert less impact on their neighbors, and what can neighbors do to exert less impact on the farm? And I might build on that by saying, what are the challenges of where you place your farm relative to if it's in a city, if it's in like a dedicated agricultural region? Let's talk about that.
So this is one of the challenges in particular of being an organic farm, is it is actually up to the organic farmer to maintain a buffer between their crops and somebody else's non-organic field, which personally I feel like is unfair. I think it would be at least nice for it to be 50-50. But this is to maintain the organic integrity of the crops they're producing. So first, there's the maintaining a buffer. Now, of course, nature doesn't operate in a silo. So there is still, even with that buffer, the potential for contamination to occur, or for drift, they call it, to occur with whether it's genetic material or spray. And I personally know farmers that have lost entire crops because of pesticide drift from a neighboring farm. So it is a real world issue, and very sad for farmers to have to deal with. And it kind of gets into the basics of conflict resolution, and the challenges of conflict resolution, of having, first even having the ability to have a conversation with that neighbor about that. But often they're not going to care if they're doing it in their financial interests, and if they care, they may not have done it so carelessly to begin with. So that's when, for better or worse, the legal system can either help you or not help you, depending on what the local county regulations are. There is more protection for certified organic farmers. It's one of the reasons I believe in getting certified, is that we actually have legal standing, and you can show that, with data, that you have this amount of production, and therefore you are expecting this amount of sales. And if you're missing out on it, then there can be some way to have the other party have to pay that.
Yeah.
But I think in an urban area, to your question, that is actually one of the few, I shouldn't say one of the few, but that is often a pro of being an urban farm, is there's less likely to be large scale chemically grown crops surrounding you. So we haven't had as much of an issue with spray or drift. Now, that's not to say that the mosquito truck mosquito spray truck that goes through doesn't still spray our streets, and we hate it when that happens, but we also don't have anything that we're harvesting for food crops growing so close to the street that we have to worry about that a whole lot. And I have emailed with the city about it, and they assured me that, of course it's safe. How could the EPA allow us to spray it if it wasn't safe? And I, sometimes you have to choose when to bite your tongue.
Got it. Oh my gosh. Do your neighbors love EarthDance? Do you have good next door neighbors?
We do have really good neighbors. Yeah. And I think, some of them, honestly, I don't want to over romanticize it though, too. Some of them probably couldn't care less that we're here. Right. It's not like everybody has a soft spot for organic vegetables. So while I wouldn't say that there's anybody who has it out for us, who has had, the major complaint we got was out of our control. There was a woman whose basement was constantly flooding whenever we had a major rain, and she thought it was because of us leaving the irrigation on. And we're like, no, we promise our irrigation is turned off right now. It's because of the rain, and we're actually letting more of the stormwater soak in. You would actually have worse of an issue if we were paved over. But it's an education barrier. Somebody said yesterday, and I like to remind myself of this, that if people really knew what you knew, they probably wouldn't have such an antagonistic attitude towards some of what we're working towards. So to just be patient and acknowledge that, not to say that what I know is better or more right, but that we all come from different perspectives, and just to relax and just not try to be the right perspective, because we're just all in this together. It doesn't help anybody to get into screaming matches.
Well, we have a question in that's actually kind of a request for advice, and I think this one might be fun, from Mike Corbett. We have a well-attended weekly farmers market in his town. I've been floating the idea lately of having a local nonprofit open and manage a farm market, aka a daily 9 to 5 operation that would activate an abandoned gas station in a completely new space. He's getting pushback from the farmers market that it would kill the weekly market, or at least hurt it. What do you think? And what arguments could Mike use?
That is a really good question. Yeah. Well, from a farmer's perspective, I would say that I want my customers to have awareness of my product, not just on a 4-hour window on a Saturday morning, but I want them to not only be able to buy it other days of the week, I want them to be able to see it other days of the week. And so I think that there's power in building the interest and demand for locally grown products if people have more access to it. So this kind of, an example is, it's a little bit different, but some people worry if there's, we want to be the only major pepper grower at the farmer's market, for example, if somebody were to say that. And then there was another person that came in and specialized on all these different varieties of peppers. But this is kind of the basis of our economic system, right? Is that if we actually have a little bit of healthy competition, it makes us get better. And I think that it actually increases consumer demand, because if you're the only pepper grower, you might be a little bit more of an anomaly of I don't really know how to work with that. But if they see it more, they're likely to actually purchase it more. So I was having this conversation with a sprout grower about how she actually thinks it's good that there's another microgreens grower at the local farmers market where she sells at. And that's kind of even more of a niche crop where you wouldn't really think that would be the case. You think, she must want all the microgreens growers to shop from her. But in reality, customers like choice, and they like to be able to shop from both.
Yeah.
I don't know if that helps. I'm trying to think from if he's saying it's mostly from the market manager's perspective. Another thing to do is think of, if her or his concern is that it would detract from traffic, think about ways that daily open farm market could promote the weekend farmers market. So put into writing some proposal where you would dedicate X amount of counter space or window space to sharing what's coming on at that Saturday's farmers market too.
Yeah. Well, this also speaks to part of EarthDance's mission. One of your tenets is putting the culture in agriculture. And I think when I first read that, I was like, what does that really mean? But the more I think about it, the more I think that we have to really create a sense that locally grown food, organic food, whatever type of food that we want to promote is a normal part of our community. And Elias had a question that I think we've kind of touched on, which is about how farmers markets are actually a social enterprise, not just business and a way to make money, but they're actually something that can activate a community. Have you seen the market?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I could go on for days about the community building aspect of the Ferguson Farmers Market. So as you can imagine, in a community like Ferguson, that's literally just been put under a microscope and had so many conflicting viewpoints surrounding it and within it, amongst our residents even, there is a lot of room for huge valleys to grow between these kind of schools of thought of like pro-protesters and anti-protesters and pro-police and anti-police, all of these, like things that just seem like they couldn't be farther apart from each other. But when you have a market where people show up, and I feel like so much a part of, being here on this planet is like showing up and like not just hiding behind a screen, throwing, hurling digital insults at people, but if you actually have face-to-face conversations with people and you see, them bringing their kids to market and, letting their kid like eat a fresh ear corn, or I don't know, I'm just trying to think of like humanizing these people that we think of as terrible people because they're just become a caricature of themselves. This is where I think that healthy race relations can come out of Ferguson and there already is a huge racial diversity of people that are not only shopping there, but are vending there. And this is not even just talking about black and white. There's Hispanic people, there's people that, barely speak any English who have booths there. And yet they have become a vital part of the fabric of our community because of their weekly presence. And it's that consistency of showing up that where I think that farmers markets have a real power to transform the feeling of being in a community, not just the economics of it.
That's a great answer, and thank you for providing all that context. I think that's heavy on a lot of people's minds, but it's so important to recognize the opportunities we have. So I think we have one more question that I'd like to make some time for, and it comes from Jack Rowe. He says, sprawl, quote unquote, carries a negative connotation for me. However, with the exponential increase in the human population, it appears we will inevitably sprawl either up vertically or out horizontally, which is tending to be what America tends to do. And Ferguson is certainly in some ways a part of that. As the conversation that we're having has alluded to, is not the more serious challenge that good production be localized, so much that each localization is relatively independent regarding the essentials of life. And I'm going to reinterpret that question a little bit to say, basically, can you live on local food alone? Is that the goal of EarthDance, to be 100% of somebody's diet locally? Or what are the feasibility challenges as we concentrate perhaps and make our cities more dense to putting more local food on plates?
So localizing our diet would of course require changing our diet, not just changing from the perspective of where we get it from, but also what we're eating. So what is growing in any given season in any given place then becomes like, if you I think of it literally as your plate. If you can just fill your plate with like the majority of things that are sourced locally, then if you prefer olive oil to local butter, go for it. If you, guess what? We don't have a lot of salt manufacturers and our producers in Missouri. So if you want some sea salt, you're probably going to be looking at non-local products. If you want chocolate or coffee, of course, non-local. So I see it as again, we're just at this like transitional stage in in the human society of needing to retrain some of our taste buds into not just preferring to eat mangoes and bananas, but we might need to like try some pawpaws that are a native fruit to our region and are in the same family as mangoes. And we might need to, and actually could kind of be a combination of mangoes and bananas and flavor wise, or we might need to start growing some more rare fruit varieties because that's what actually grows well without a lot of harmful sprays that people often say is required for or for fruit production, but it's just because, you know, our climate isn't really conducive to growing peaches in Missouri very easily without there being specific varieties. So yeah, I think that I personally have made an effort to shift my diet, and I also still love coffee and chocolate. So
Right.
I think this is kind of where everybody makes their own personal decisions about how far you're willing to go. But even to just start to build your own consciousness of like, can I make sure that at least one of the things I'm eating on a daily basis comes from a local farm? You know, imagine the magnitude of impact that would have if every one of us did that.
Right. I mean, that's something I've been thinking about a lot too, as we've been talking about local food, because I think a lot of the times when we say, let's, you know, make more urban farms, like my first thought is like, you will pry my avocados from my cold dead hands. And like, there's no way you could produce enough wheat for every citizen who wants to eat bread. And I don't think that the local farmers I've met and know are not actually asking people to make that kind of a bargain. And there are emerging technologies that are going to make growing non-natives perhaps a little bit easier, but there's also, like, more to the point, so many things that I've never tried locally that would probably rock my world if I put the least amount of effort into it and would give me a lot of joy. It's not about deprivation, it's about finding new ways to enjoy what's growing in your backyard.
That's a great point. And I think I also want to mention that I think we do need to consider, and not just consider, we need to actually scale up some of our farms, because I think, again, it's like this cutification of urban agriculture that we think, oh yeah, you can grow all of your, you know, dietary needs on a stamp, or what do they call it, like a postcard, whatever, postcard-sized plot of land. And it's like, you know what? I think we actually need some farms dedicated to growing of a certain amount of volume so that it's still sustainable for the environment, but it's also just going to give that economy of scale where food prices are going to be, you know, still accessible for most folks. Because you can only imagine how much, if you were a farmer growing half an acre of wheat, you would need to sell those wheat berries for in order to make it worth your while. You know, the whole other rhythm of growing each individual crop. Each crop has its own rhythm and has its own soil requirements and tools to harvest. And you know, we do need to have mechanization. I'm not trying to go back to like we just all need to grow every single thing that we eat. Yes, let's grow as much of that as possible. But in reality, we're going to be sourcing some of it from further afoot farms.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great pragmatic note to end on, and to give something else, our viewers, something else to do. Check out earthdancefarms.org for sure. And there are lots of opportunities for people to get involved, both locally. I invited everyone who reads from STL to participate in this for sure. I know you have the Farmers Formal coming up in October. Do I have that right? What's the date on that?
Friday the 13th.
Okay.
Friday, October 13th at Union Station. It's the most delicious fundraiser you'll ever go to.
Yeah.
And I would love to invite all of your viewers and listeners to also like us on Facebook. Yeah. It's actually where we are a little more up to date than our website. So EarthDance Organic Farm School is what we're listed as on Facebook.
Definitely. And if you'd like to make a go of it as an apprentice in St. Louis, you know, I live with a success story. And I know it brought a ton of joy to his life and changed the way that he thinks about a lot of things. And you can just donate to EarthDance and keep it going and support local food in your town as well. Yes. All right. Thank you so much, Molly. And thank you all for coming to watch. All right. Have a great day. Bye.
Take care. Bye.